Hello, and welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. Each episode, we talk about a particular topic in the life of a professor. We are tenure-track faculty members in the sciences, working at a primarily undergraduate university in California. The purpose of our podcast is reflection, so we bring something we think is working and something we're working on to discuss. Welcome to the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. I'm Claire.
And I'm Ruth. And today we're talking about off-the-wall questions. But before we do that, Claire, will you tell us how was your week?
Sure. So my week, I feel like I had this breakthrough with how to develop my virtual assignments that I'm working on now. So I want to tell you about that. We have a bunch of labs that are multi-day experiments, and I'm converting them to some virtual, approximation of what you would do in the lab. And I had been kind of going day by day, like, I need to make an assignment for the lab tomorrow, so I'll make it, and then I'll do part 2 of that lab next week before it's due. But that was just really confusing because I kept having to remember where I was at each point. I had how many days have I gotten through with this assignment, and have I posted them all, and when are they due? And I had to keep picking up and putting down different assignments, and it was just really too confusing, and I had too many things going on. And so what I'm doing now is I'm going all the way through the assignment as one task, So like there's 3 lab days. So the next 3 Tuesdays have this assignment. So I'm going to make part 1, 2, and 3 all.
Yeah.
And then I'll be done with that whole assignment, and I won't even have to think about it again. And it seemed like that wasn't really possible because there were just too many balls in the air. I have to get all the things done tomorrow, and I don't think that's really gone away, but it's actually the transition time from going to one assignment to another and then having to remember which balls are in the air is just a little bit worse than finishing that one ball, putting it down, and then moving on. So it's a new thing, and we'll see how it works, but so far I'm much happier with just actually finishing the whole assignment, even if I don't have to post part 3 of it until 2 weeks from now. Just finish that whole assignment, and then the students have it posted as well. So anyway, I've been feeling a lot less crazy since I've implemented that
This is making me think we need to have another episode about virtual teaching.
We do.
For sure. But yeah, it's so much. There's so many things.
Yes.
But yeah, I totally agree. Having that whole thing just done in a chunk.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah. And, even if it's like I have to stop midway through to do lecture or whatever, the idea of like, I'm going to finish the chunk and that chunk will be done and then I'll start another chunk is just a lot easier on my poor mind.
Yeah. No, I know, our poor minds. That's like literally what's happening is like our poor little brains. Yeah. But yeah.
So how was your week?
Well, my week, is actually a lot of virtual struggles.
Okay.
And I think I'm finally getting some stabilization, and I think a little bit I feel like I guess my brain is very linear.
Okay.
And having this kind of like 3-dimensional sort of thinking of, okay, I'm uploading the videos now, but they're not going to have watched them until this date, so then this assignment needs to be relevant. Like that is pushing me over the edge. So I kind of, and finally I did a map and I put it up on my wall, and so that's making me feel a bit better. But I feel like I'm grieving a little the old ways, because if I wanted to do a certain activity, I could just rock in there and lecture about vectors that day, and then we could just do it. And that is not like trying to do this planning out of when they might watch the videos, and that's tricky.
You have to make the video in time to post it, in time for them to watch it before the activity.
Right, and so it's sort of like the videos they watch in week 5, I can't do this activity on that until week 6. And then they can't have a quiz on that until after we've done it. It's just like trying to map it all out is kind of...
Yeah.
But I did have... I didn't realize how much I would find the one-way nature of this kind of difficult. And it's interesting, right? Because I'm kind of not being a student, but both of my kids are doing distance learning.
Uh-huh.
And my kindergartner... It was really interesting because I talked to the teacher and she was just sort of sad. Like, I don't have any connection with the kids. I was like, they don't see it that way. Like, my kindergartner thinks you're talking to her when you have the videos.
Oh, interesting.
And she's super into it. And she's like, so-and-so told me to do this and this. And she feels the connection even if the teacher isn't getting it.
Well, that's good to hear. That's a really good point.
And so I was kind of like, oh, because I'm doing recorded lectures and then we meet for this activity section.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of in the midst of trying to get the breakout rooms, oh my God, trying to get them up and going, this student was like, hey, by the way, like your lectures are actually really good. And I was like, oh, like I almost
How
started crying. I was like,
nice.
thank you so much. Because, like, normally in lecture, even if they're just being polite, they're nodding along or making
Right.
faces, and you have some sense of how this is all going over.
Right.
And
Have they
it
fallen
feels
asleep or are they awake? Are they
right.
nodding? Like, where
Is
are we
anybody
at?
crying? Like,
Yeah.
but I just miss those cues so
Mm-hmm.
much,
Mm-hmm.
and so that student saying that was like, oh, thank you. Like I had no, and maybe it's just her opinion. There's 35 other
Sure,
people, so
but
who knows?
still.
But it just was so nice to hear something
Yeah.
back, because the only thing I'm hearing is like not even complaints, but just, oh, you haven't opened that module yet, or
Right.
this link isn't working, or
Mm-hmm.
so it just all feels negative.
It feels like it's all going wrong when really you're just only
Right.
hearing about the things that are going wrong, I guess. Yeah.
And I'm feeling a big call from talking to other people to sort of normalize for people that this is just really hard, and it
Mm-hmm.
isn't the same. And I
It's not the
think
same.
just the more we can acknowledge that, and then a lot of people are feeling bad because they're not accurately recreating their entire classroom, and
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. For
But
sure.
so yeah, but then I was thinking that like even if we don't feel, do you have this happen to you on Zoom where someone says something and you've no idea who it
You've
was?
no
Because
idea who it is because their
I
picture
know.
should come up, but sometimes it doesn't. And or I don't
Right,
know.
and
I don't
I
know what
do
the algorithm
gallery
is.
view because
Uh-huh.
otherwise, if people cough, like they come up and stuff. So I do gallery, but then sometimes I'm like, could the person who just said that do a big wave or like something so I know who
Yes.
just, yeah.
You know what happened the other day is somebody asked a question and I was so confident it was this one person.
Oh
I
no.
almost said their name, but I
Oh.
decided I better not just to be safe. And then later the person told me, "Oh, I'm so sorry I missed lecture." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I thought you were there cuz I thought it was you who asked the question."
Well, again, being on the other side of it with the kids, sometimes when the teacher's like, "Oh, who said that?" I'm like, "What? Like you have all our names on the screen, like what?" But then
Uh-huh.
it's so hard, like when you're talking and there's like 30 faces on there to
Right.
figure out who said it. So
That is
yeah,
funny.
it's weird. But okay, tell us, have you got a quote for this
I
week?
do. And so the quote is something that I think about a lot. Like Ralph and I say this to each other all the time. And it's the main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. Stephen Covey. And yeah, just all the time. I mean, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier about just finishing the assignment. Like, is that the main thing? Am I going to finish this assignment? That's the main thing. And once I finish that, I can do the next main thing, but not doing 50 things at once and getting interrupted and all that. So, main thing is keeping the main thing the main thing. And it's very, so true all the time, I feel like.
That's such a challenge for me at the moment. Like, especially, I feel like I have all these emails coming in and
Yes.
getting derailed constantly by,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
I'm going to have to learn some better skills for,
Yeah. Because the emails, a lot of the emails from students, I feel like I always prioritize that high, but now it's extra high because I
yeah.
don't see them as much and we're doing all this virtual stuff and I want to make sure it's streamlined for them. And I think that is true, but I still need to not interrupt my main thing all the time by emails. I need to check periodically, intentionally, or you know what I mean.
Well, even like, we have already put this to bed, but the tenure file,
Uh,
like I was interrupting myself. Like I'd be in section one and I'd be like, but what about section five? I haven't done it, like, and I
totally.
kind of had to be like, no, we're going through this linearly
The
and we're
main
not
thing
hopping
right
around.
now is section 1. Don't worry about section 5. Yeah, totally.
The main thing is keeping the main thing. I really like that.
It's so good. And it
Okay.
does make all the difference. And it's really helpful mentally, too, to be like, this is the thing I'm doing. Like, obviously you
Right,
have to
and
pause to do a meeting or whatever, but that's the thing you're going to come back to.
yeah, yeah, and I actually have just realized hearing you say this out loud, I've fallen off the wagon of picking a highlight to my day, and that was really
Mm.
working so well for me,
Mm-hmm.
and everything just feels like it's gotten a little chaotic, and I'm hoping,
Yes.
yeah, I'm going to try and right the ship this week a little bit.
I love it.
Yeah.
Right the ship. We can do it. That's a good
Cool. So
phrase.
Do you want to tell us a bit about what this title means?
Okay, so off the wall questions, what I'm thinking about that is you're cruising, you're going through lecture, you're having a nice back and forth with students, the content's lining up nicely, you're going through this nice arc you've planned, and then somebody asks an off the wall question, and maybe you get hung up answering it. Maybe others even have questions about that question, which then gets, that's just things have gone wrong. The flow has gone completely, and you run out of time. It doesn't have to go that extreme. It could just be a minor setback in the lecture. But how to not get thrown off your groove by an off-the-wall question is what I'm thinking about.
I'm really I really like this topic because I think it really speaks to the fact that teaching is so much of a performance. And like even for me, like even things like when we're in the classroom, students looking at their cell phone, like anything can distract me and
Sure.
get me out of whatever, and I think of these like theater actors, and like just like you're trying to get in this headspace
Sure. Yeah.
and keep in it. And so
You're on stage, you're doing a performance, and you need to keep that going, even if you get distracted.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. It's not totally a student thing, but one time there was just some snafu with childcare, and I had to bring my daughter, who was 4 at the time, to class for 5 minutes, waiting for the babysitter to come and pick her up. And I was like, okay, we can do this. This is fine. And she was coloring away and happy. And then like I was writing on the board, and she shouted out like, "I love you, mommy." And I was like, "Thank you." And I just kept writing. I was like, what am I doing? Like it was, and she was like, she still is like, "Do you remember the time I said I love you and you didn't say it back?" And I'm like, okay.
No.
But I was like so in professor mode. I was like, great, good comment, thank you. And back to work. And I was just like,
good comment,
no,
carrying
like,
on.
I know. And I just couldn't like be the two things at the same time. Like be the mom and then be the like, yeah. And it's not like I'm super business-like in the classroom, but I just couldn't match those identities. But anyway, so what is working for you dealing with off-the-wall questions?
Okay, so I had this one semester where I had several students who tended to ask questions that I thought were off the wall. I don't know if they might have been trying to connect it to other things. And so that's one thing I want to mention is sometimes the students might be having fun asking crazy questions, and that's different than if they are trying to connect it to something else or have a misunderstanding or something like that. So in all my thoughts with off-the-wall questions, I don't want to discourage questions, and I definitely don't want to discourage trying to connect the material to other things. But if it's off the wall, like if it's totally wacky, we're not talking about that, this is beyond the scope of the lecture, or it's totally unrelated, I don't want to go talk about it. So anyway, so what's working for me is if it's truly off the wall, and I'm like, this is not what we're talking about right now, definitely not the right time for this topic, then I think it's fine to say, that's beyond the topic of the lecture. I'd be happy to talk with you about it after class or in office hours, and then get straight back to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
That works great. It does take a judgment call. How off the wall is it? Sometimes it's you would think it'd be off the wall or not off the wall, but I feel like there is a gray area where it's like, did you think about that? Like, is there some misconception that's making you say that we need to fix?
Yeah.
Or what? And so you do need to work on that gray area. But still, I think the key, if it's not clearly an off-the-wall question that I just want to say, not right now, that's not what we're doing, then I think it's a matter of answering the question relatively quickly and making it clear that this is a side point, you know? Like sometimes on the board I write in parentheses, like, this is the side point, we'll go through that real quick so that you have the information. Everybody might be interested, everybody can write it down, but let's be clear that this is side. It's not part of my nice flow of content, but we'll talk about it. So just, address it without being led too far off on a tangent, because, I mean, of course, then there's totally off the wall, there's middle ground, and then there's questions that you weren't intending to have asked, but actually are really interesting, and...
I know, because sometimes it's fruitful, right?
Right.
And, yeah.
So there's kind of a spectrum there. So truly off the wall, I would say, no, we're not talking about that, but I'd be glad to talk with you about it later. Middle ground, answer it quickly and get back and make sure it's clear it's a side topic. And then if it's interesting and totally relevant, but like you weren't planning on going there, then I don't know, judgment call on whether you want to go there or not and how long you want to stay, how flexible your class is. I don't know, that's kind of where I'm at right now with the off the wall questions.
Yeah.
But it's definitely tricky. And I get thrown off for sure. Like if somebody asks a question, sometimes it's a relevant question, but I don't know the answer and I have to think about it, and then that is a distraction and can throw me off my groove even if we get back into it. So anyway, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, but I think that's perfect and very responsive. And I think even if someone asked a perfectly relevant question, it's still totally relevant to say, oh, yeah, not right now, and then come back to it later.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, I think that's totally fine. And I think that's what kind of stresses me out with things, where I'm like, I have to respond to everyone and address everything. But then I really was committed to my lecture plan. And so I think, but it sounds like you're lovely and responsive.
Well, thank you.
But it's true.
So what's working for you with off the wall questions?
I think that for me, it kind of comes in different formats. What is an off the wall question kind of. One thing for me, I think, is just time teaching. Because I think in the beginning, when I started teaching, there was never ease to it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So somebody saying something weird or something weird happening really could derail me off what I was doing.
Yeah.
And it was really difficult to get back on. And that absolutely still happens. But I feel like with less intensity and less regularity. And like, because there's different kinds of off the wall questions. But I have spoken on here about like a really terrible semester with the Dementor kids. And like, as they shall forever be known in my head. But they... and my confidence was in the toilet, so if they would ask a question and it was usually a question that was like, why are you doing this wrong?
Right.
Or like, isn't that supposed to be this? And it was so frustrating because I would be right, but I would get totally tangled up in myself.
You're like, oh, wait, really? Let me double check. And then you check and you're like, no, this is right. Let me explain why it's right. And then by then, like, what were we even talking about? Yeah.
Totally. And there was a couple of times where I was like, got so flustered. Actually, like, I'll come back to this. And then I got back to my office and within 2 seconds, you're like, oh, of course it's this. It was that. I knew it was that.
Yeah.
And so that was not great. So that was, I found really tough. And I think just with time and with having, like, say the class I'm teaching right now, I think I've taught like 8 or 9 times at this point. So I know that the answer is definitely what I say.
You've done the same example before. Yeah.
Totally. And so it's just like the minute a student, you're like, no, it's definitely, like, I'm not like interrupting them, but in my head, I'm like, no, I know you think that's what it is, but I know what it is. So I think some of it is just time and experience and just the ease of that. And I think, I don't know. And then I think, it feels like this whole performance of teaching, there's an added element now about being in your home doing it. Sure. And so there's other things derailing me too, for sure. So that's like definitely.
Yeah.
And another thing that, I only do this in one of my classes, but one piece of feedback I've gotten is that I don't give a lot of applications of material.
Okay.
Which is totally true. And I think, so I made up this thing one year where we did something called info blasts.
Okay.
Which was the students would get 3 minutes at the beginning of lab to, like, in a group of 3, talk about some application to the material we're doing. Oh, cool.
That's nice.
And that was handy because that semester I did have a student who would often come up with really random, is this related to, and I'd be like, that's a great thing for the info blast. You do that and let us know. And so that was helpful, but I don't know how applicable that is to like a broader thing. And so, yeah.
But I think that speaks to the redirect. The question is good. You want to have the enthusiasm and interest. It just needs to be redirected towards a different time. Like there's plenty of times to have conversations about what this might be related to that aren't lecture. Because lecture, we have, specific plans for what we're doing. And we are, of course, going to talk about questions and whatnot. But if it's an off-the-wall question, that's not the time.
Yeah, I wonder, like, is it, Like, should it just be really like class time is for clarifying questions, not, I don't
I know
know.
it's
But
scary to make
then,
a big thing like that,
oh,
but
totally.
yeah.
Well, that's actually what I'm coming to in my working
Oh,
on.
okay.
But yeah. So for you, what are you working on in terms of off the wall
Well, kind of
questions?
that, yeah, redirecting. It seems like, so office hours, great place for wacky
Hmm.
questions. You know, we can connect it to other classes, we can go beyond the class content, we can do any of that. So kind of how to get, it's rather than just saying, oh, ask me that in office hours, trying to actually get them to come to office hours, and we will talk about that, and we can
Hmm.
spend a lot of time on it. Just somehow conveying that genuinely we can talk about that, just not during lecture because we're taking the other 70 people's time and this isn't related to what we're talking about? So somehow
Yeah.
actually making sure that we do talk about it, and
I think
encouraging
I've
people to come talk about it.
not,
And everybody probably has some question that they don't ask that they'd be interested in hearing more about if they
yeah,
came to office hours to talk about it. So how to get that to happen, you know?
I know. And it's, I think I have definitely, not as a practice, but just every now and again had a like, oh, that's a great, but that's a one-on-one question. Let's,
Ooh, I like that
like that's
phrase.
not a, yeah. So maybe that, but yeah, I don't know.
That's a great, but
Do you
that's a
ever
one on
get
one. I like it.
scared though when they ask you something and you're like, I don't even want to talk to you about this because
Uh
I don't
huh.
know the answer. Like, sorry, that's really bad, but like,
Sure.
you're like, I
Sure.
really don't know the application of this to like World of Warcraft or
Uh
whatever, and
huh.
I don't know.
But there's a lot of times where people ask me a question, and my initial reaction is, I don't know. And then when I think about it, I'm like, but I do know enough
I
to satisfy
know.
you with because I don't know it fully, but I do know
That's a
something
really
that you
good
don't know
point.
that I would think. Then often if I say that something, then they're like, oh, cool, that's all they wanted to know?
Dude, this is me getting bogged down with the
Yeah.
whole expert thing where you have to, like, you're just further along the track than they are. You're right. So, like, no
Right.
matter what you say, it will be like probably some information that they
Sure.
didn't have. That's a good
And even
point.
if it's
I like that.
oh, I don't know a lot about that topic, but here's what I do know, and I think it would be related in this way, that's still, I mean, depending on their question, that's often what they're looking for is this relevant to this thing? And you're like, well, here's how I can
Yeah.
think it might be. And they're like, cool. That can be the end
Yeah.
of the conversation.
I
Yeah.
like that. Okay, that's really helpful.
So, yeah. And the other thing is the students don't really know if they're going off track sometimes. They
Oh,
might
yeah.
so a good thing I like to say, okay, if you still have that question at the end of the lecture, then ask it again. But we're going to
Oh,
be
that's,
going through some
yeah.
related stuff. So like, because often we get to a point and I say, what are your questions? And they ask questions, and then they're trying to make sure they understand it. So they ask a bunch of questions, but they might not be the right questions, but that's just because they don't fully understand it yet. And so if we get to the end, then they'll know whether they still have that question or not. So anyway, I
Yeah.
like that go to.
Yeah, it's so, because I think what I have is how do you kind of shut down total randomness without stifling questions? And I
Yes,
definitely
good
have
one.
had people who have had total randomness.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so how do you do that without, because like the whole vibe I'm trying to get to is there's no such thing as a stupid question. And then you're
Right.
like, actually, though, that kind of, I don't want that question. So I don't know how to like do that. And like,
Right.
I know maybe why I'm thinking that, but someone else might hear that just as, oh, she just doesn't like questions or she doesn't want us
Right.
to, so that's
Or you don't want them
something,
to be scared that you're going to think their question is like this question that you shut down and they don't know what the
right.
criteria are. Yeah.
So yeah, it's tricky. And like, this isn't the same as the off the wall questions, but
Mm-hmm.
something I really struggle with is in the beginning, I try to go really, really slow with math.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a certain point in my mind, I'm taking the training wheels off
Mm-hmm.
and we're kind of picking up speed a little bit. And sometimes people are asking, which is completely fine and totally relevant. But it's also, if we did that all day, we would literally never get anything done.
Totally.
And
Totally.
so, yeah, I really struggle with. But and I think I really like what you said. Like, okay, we'll hang on to that and then we'll come back to it at the end if it
Yeah.
hasn't been
Yeah.
cleared up for you. So I think that's a really good one.
And I like to be sure to say, ask it again if you don't know it at that point, rather than relying on myself to remember.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, totally.
But hopefully they feel comfortable asking it again. And same, yeah, I know what you mean about the algebra thing. Sometimes I say, and you solve for x, and here's what x is. And then people are like, wait, but how did you solve for x? And we can talk it through. But yeah, it depends on where we're at the semester. Because maybe if it's later
Right,
on,
'cause
I'd be like, you just should go try it, and then let me know if you can't get it. You know?
Yeah, totally. And it's, okay, so the way I've been ranting on here about Casper ter
Uh-huh.
the book, and I heard him talking about something, and he works a lot in activism, and
Okay.
he said something that's a sort of a known in activism is you should never do something for someone that they can do for themselves.
Ooh.
And that blew my mind because I am always doing things for students that they could absolutely do for themselves.
Interesting.
And I think it's me being really helpful, but I wonder where the line is where you could say, oh, like I always find students links to information instead of just telling them you should look that up.
I see.
Do you know what I mean?
That
And
is interesting.
so I don't know, but I don't think it's totally what we're talking about, but maybe another time. But
Yeah.
have you ever had someone, I'm just thinking, I had a student once who was really problematic in a lot of ways, but I think they deliberately wanted to knock things off track all the time.
Yes.
And like even one time I remember they were like, I was doing a problem and I was like in 10 degrees and I feel like this person had like a sixth sense for when I was really getting into my groove, and then they would just
Oh no.
try and derail. And I remember him being like, oh, I did a problem in math yesterday and the answer was 23 degrees as well. And you're like, yeah, like I don't know what to.
Cool.
There wasn't.
Moving on.
I know, and it was just like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I would want to say in that situation is something like, oh yeah, what a coincidence. And then like carry on talking like we are done. That was the end of that interaction.
Well, and I think one thing I need to remember too is that I always feel like if I shut him down, everyone's going to think, but the students know.
They know.
They know when someone is like,
right.
They know exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think you even are shutting him down. We're just like, you acknowledge it and you carry on without stopping. That's
yeah.
That doesn't seem like shutting down to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's so weird. It's really, and it's something I had no idea being on the other side, like being a student, how much you need to kind of keep in your track as a professor when you're doing like your kind of performance and
yeah. Well, cool. Good to think about all this.
Yeah, I really appreciate this one. It's super interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Ralph, as always.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Professor Podcast with Ruth and Claire. We're delighted to have you as a listener, and we would love to hear from you. And if you want to email us, our address is contactprofessorpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear any of your suggestions for future shows or professor quotes that you might want to share with us, or even just things that have come up for you when you were listening to previous episodes. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we would love if you would spread the word. So the best way to spread word is by telling people if you think they should listen to it, or you can leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.